Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's guest is Chris Watson, VP Marketing and Communications for KVH Industries. KVH is a global leader in mobile connectivity and maritime VSAT delivered via the KVH One network. In this episode, we're going to focus on connectivity, which has always been a hot topic for the maritime space, as well as the evolution of satellite telecoms, especially around the advent of Starlink and the impact to the sailors, as well as the equipment and what goes on with the shoreside personnel. Chris, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion because communication, we take it for granted on a daily basis on our ships, whether it's through satellite pings or through more sophisticated communications. And it impacts everybody. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope everybody else is. So let's start. What is the latest going on with KVH? Because there must be a lot of things going on in your space that really just impacts the day-to-day for everybody.
Yeah, it's never boring here. Our responsibility, we've got fleets that have come to us, turn to KVH to make sure that they stay always connected. And this affects everything when it has to do with ships. It used to just be that, ships would be sending in a news, they'd have to send in a noon report, or it was limited to basic radio communications. But we're seeing such a change in the marketplace right now with connectivity for operations, with electronic charting, with all sorts of efficiency efforts that are going into place. Things like Internet of Things, the number of sensors that are on board a commercial vessel is just mind-boggling, and they're all generating data. But that data doesn't do any good if it's not getting off of the ship, and you need that connectivity. And then you have the crews. We're seeing more and more younger crew members coming on board, and they are digital natives. They are not used to not having a smartphone that can keep them connected. So here at KVH, our focus is delivering those services for connectivity, value-added services that help vessels and crew stay connected, stay healthy, operate efficiently, and do it as reliably as possible. So that's why we've got things like 24/7, 365 tech support, because as you know, commercial shipping is not a 9-to-5 job. It is 24/7, and the people who are supporting it need to be 24/7 as well.
In this day and age, when people say, well, whether or not they get a phone call at night or something, maybe it happens a little bit more with the mobile phone. But what people don't realize is that there's a whole segment of the industry that never knew anything else other than being on call 24/7 or being at least available to be on call. If it wasn't your mobile, it was your house phone about something going on in the wee hours of the night, because for someplace else in the world, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's something that's still, I think, that people understand, but because they don't deal with it on a day-to-day, can't maybe have a harder time comprehending the impact for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the last couple of years and you talk about how things have changed. One of the biggest things, and I'd love to get your thought on this, is Starlink, right? And I think that, it's in a way the shiny new object. And in an industry that sometimes eschews advances in technology, it seems like it's picking up a lot of steam very fast. Talk a little bit about how your product and what you do fits in with that, and how that's changing what the overall market is looking at.
I think you made a really good point in there about not necessarily resistance to change, but just the fact that there has always been change. And sometimes it's been a little slower in the commercial maritime market. It can be a little bit more conservative because, we're talking about millions of dollars of cargo and huge vessels and crews that, so you can't necessarily get too wacky when you're looking at solutions. And I've been with KVH for 25 years now, and I've watched the evolution of maritime connectivity from really barely better than dial-up, back in the late 90s, where INMARSAT was amazing when all of a sudden you were getting, 500 kilobits per second. That was mind-boggling that you could go that fast, and it cost a lot. But all of a sudden you were in a situation where you could do something more than simply send in a basic, report. And we've now changed, the industry has changed to, we launched our small VSAT terminals in 2007. And that was radical because no one ever thought that you could get fast communications with an antenna that was only 60 centimeters in diameter. And now we're seeing these new services like Starlink and the other ones that are going to be coming, like OneWeb and Amazon Kuiper. And they have just been a dramatic evolution in what can happen. It's changing how people think about maritime connectivity, where it used to be you had to think about, I've got connections, but it cost me a bunch of money to get that data. So I need to be really careful about how I use it. I need to think about when I'm allowed to use it. I can let my crew have some, maybe I might let my crew make some phone calls, but I'm not letting my crews get on the social media or anything like that. There's no way that I would ever think about doing like a video conference or streaming data. It just wasn't feasible. It wasn't practical because of either the speeds or the cost. With Starlink now coming on board, all of a sudden people are saying, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be as complicated. It doesn't have to be as expensive, and it doesn't have to be as slow. So with Starlink and then the predecessors that, the other competitors that are going to be coming, it's this new emerging solution that is going to be just tremendous in terms of ensuring that these commercial vessels, they're not out there completely remote. Now they truly are nodes on a corporate network. The same way as, someone who works remotely from home is able to get on Teams or get on Zoom and have a conversation. They're able to get on the servers. All of a sudden, that is now something that is practical on board ships. Is it the right thing for everybody? Not necessarily. And for us, where we also have other services where Starlink is classified as what's called a LEO, or a low Earth orbit solution, and it only orbits at about 500, 600 miles above the Earth. We also have our network, the KVH1 network, that includes VSAT, and these use geosynchronous satellites that are 22,000 miles above the Earth, and it looks like they don't actually move. They're rotating at the same speed. We're able to bring those together. So now all of a sudden you have vessels that are able to have multiple ways of communicating, and they can choose which way to communicate works best for a given application, a given user type, or have it as backup, where if one of them goes out, you've got multiple points of communication. I mean, no ship only wants to have a single point of contact. They want to have backups. So now all of a sudden you've got Starlink that can be screaming fast and, not nearly as expensive, as legacy systems. And when you combine that with the other solutions that are out there, you get a very robust connectivity package that allows crew operations, IoT, anything that you want to be able to be in touch with people on shore.
Talk about some of the really positive things, and we can get to a few of these points later. Certainly I want to talk, and I think we're going to take a little space to talk about what connectivity means to crews and their well-being. One of the issues, of course, with shipping is the looming shortage of mariners, which can be attributed a little bit to what you said, where you get new mariners who are native to having an iPhone, right? What made my generation unique, being a Gen Xer, is I started off without one and I ended up with one. So I can kind of go whichever way works. But I want to get back a little bit to, you talk about, having Starlink and other platforms. And one of the things that I think about when I hear this is a little bit of the stuff that maybe causes some angst amongst the ship owners. And I want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. That's got to be a real big issue, because now all of a sudden, like you said before, you were kind of this floating island at a fairly slow speed, not, let's say, as easy to target for outsiders or for malware or what have you. Now you're kind of opening that up, and, like, as you noted, becoming a node on a corporate platform. Talk a little bit about how clients in the market are addressing that as speeds start to pick up, and it almost becomes, at some point, maybe in the next 5 years, becomes a little bit indistinguishable from Chris working remotely, whether it's me, Chris, or you, Chris, working remotely, working remotely, let's say, because it's really going to look the same at some point.
Right. Yeah, cybersecurity, you're absolutely right that it is something that everybody is worried about. And we've seen where there have been malware attacks and ransomware attacks that have basically shut down fleets for extended periods of time where they've had to rebuild data. And it costs not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, it's costing millions of dollars when that happens. So any fleet that is looking at, making sure that they have some level of protection, there's a number of different things to take into account. One is simply crew education. I remember reading about a study where some of the worst people when it came to cybersecurity were IT people, because if you dropped a flash drive on the ground, they were just naturally inclined to pick it up and plug it into a computer to see what it did. So you see, and all of a sudden, without even really thinking about it. So the individuals, people are a prime entryway for that, where they just don't realize it. They go to a website and it happens to have malware on it.
Right.
So part of it is education. Part of it is also looking at the different services that can be there in terms of things like antivirus and anti-malware. But we also look at it from a very holistic perspective here at KVH, where we are looking at dealing with and supporting the industry regulations and requirements that are out there, as far as, for example, the separation of the operational network and the crew network on board ship, where basically if a member of the crew were to download something inadvertently, it might affect the crew network, but it's separated from the shipboard operation. You want to make sure that there's that partition. So we offer a number of different ways that ship owners can do that by separating the onboard networks, those local area networks, where you could have one for operations that's completely segregated from, maybe the officers, maybe IoT, the crew, et cetera, for that level of protection. But we, as a service provider, also look at how do we ensure that there's network encryption, that when the data comes from the satellite down to the ground station and then goes out or comes in from the internet, because it has to get into the network on land somehow, that we are actually scanning that we've got protections to make sure that nothing is getting into our network that could then potentially put a risk for a vessel. And then there's various tools that can be brought on board. We offer a number of different add-ons that, for someone who wants an even more robust enterprise grade solution that can be based on board ship, these are tools that can be plugged right into the network that we build for fleets that allow them to have an even higher level of protection.
When you go into an office and you start to talk about things like, hey, with a combination of one of these LEO satellites, such as Starlink, or as you mentioned, others coming online, with our tried and true offerings, and you kind of give this speed, connectivity, all this stuff, are you seeing this being something that is being more well received, or is this being a little bit still, like we talked about the resistance word? Are we still seeing a lot of resistance, or does it really depend on segments? I imagine cruise ships and local, and maybe some of the more liner type services, a little bit more open arms, and maybe some of the other services less. How are you kind of seeing this as you start to go into shops, and not just necessarily the package that KVH offers, but maybe similar competitors, but they're all good. There's going to be a mindset to that. Are we getting to the point now where it's becoming a little bit more kind of accepted?
I think that there is definitely a recognition that an investment in communications is not a waste. That it is vital for efficiency. It's vital for the regulatory requirements that are out there. It's vital for crew health. So as we've been talking with fleet managers, ship owners, they are definitely understanding the need. Now, obviously, they also have budgets to work through. So what we try to do is we try to offer a range of solutions, and then they can choose sort of how they want to put it together and basically create this bespoke hybrid solution that could bring together things like geosynchronous VSAT with Starlink. We're seeing an expansion and real excitement around 5G cellular. where the range for that is expanding, where many ships that are traveling up and down coastlines, they're often staying within 5G range, and 5G can be faster than satellite. It can be less expensive than satellite, and even shore-based Wi-Fi. So what we're able to do, and what we're seeing other companies do, is determine how to put together a hybrid solution that meets that particular fleet's needs. And it could be a fleet of small fishing vessels where, really what they're looking for is maybe cellular and Starlink, because they're a little bit more cost conscious, but they need to have it because if it's a fishing fleet, they've got to be able to, send in their catch data, things like that before they get to shore. Whereas when you're talking about an LNG tanker or, a bulk carrier, something like that, where they may end up having 3, 4, even 5 different means of communicating on board. And then it's a matter of how do you manage those? Because if they're all disparate, then you're not getting the efficiency of having those. But if you're able to bring them together through some sort of below deck middleware that can basically say, let's make sure that we're always using the fastest, most efficient one, and if that's not available, we'll automatically switch to the next. Or we can say the crew gets to use the VSAT while the ship's operations is relying on Starlink, but they're all being managed through the same tool, which makes it very easy then for fleet managers and their IT teams to be able to see what's going on with all of the different vessels. So seeing that the data, understanding the reporting, fleet owners want to get that information now. They want to understand what's really happening on board ship. And that's part of the key to these solutions that are being created.
Is that an avenue now also for the use of some sort of AI or MI and kind of managing that? Or are you guys seeing that creep into your domain as well? Because we're hearing a lot about AI and certain things. Certainly, ships that are autonomous and things like that. But really, that's not the question. The question is managing it or other parts of the satellite communications. Are you seeing that kind of going in that direction as well?
I think how I would classify it is we're seeing a move towards intelligent management, whether or not it's AI. I mean, we have some elements, that just sort of help with tracking and flagging, issues. For example, all of our satellite systems report back to KVH every day with reports on more than 150 health and performance parameters. And we're able to then use automated systems to identify if anything's operating outside of normal scope. So it's a flag for our engineers, and our engineers and tech support can then help address that, sometimes before the customer even knows there's an issue. But when you have these other solutions, a good example is many of your listeners have probably been in events, concerts, large sporting events where they take a picture with their cell phone and they want to send it out, and they see that they've got 5 bars, but the photo just isn't uploading to social media. And it's not that the signal strength isn't good, it's that everybody else is on the network at the exact same time, so it's contended. Intelligent hybrid design will look at that and say, yeah, that's the best signal, but the data is not getting through it. So I'm not going to keep banging my head on the door trying to, get it to open so that I can send this photo. I'm going to recognize that I need to switch to another network, another channel that will allow me to get the data out. Maybe it'll be a little slower. Maybe it won't be quite as cost effective, but I'll get it out while this other solution is completely overwhelmed. We've heard about that where, like on the leisure side of things, leisure boaters who might have a Starlink and a cruise ship comes in that has a lot of Starlink. Well, their connectivity is, quite often, slows down for a period of time just because that cruise ship is taking up so much of the bandwidth. And that's the sort of thing that intelligent hybrid design addresses, because it says, I can still get it out, but there might be a better way of doing it, even though there's something that looks like it has the best signal. Let's look at what else has the best quality, the best throughput. So I think that's where the industry is going, to be able to offer people the best performance at all times.
That's a fascinating, first of all, it's a great analogy maybe if there's a bunch of Swifties who are listening, and I kind of doubt that. Oh, you never know, but I've looked at my demographics. Maybe there's some closet Swifties in the typical demographic that listens to this podcast, and that's all right. Or maybe if I go see the Red Hot Chili Peppers this summer, I want to know why it takes so long to download those pictures. But that's an interesting thing, and I just kind of and I love also the example of the cruise ship. I could imagine a few thousand people trying to get an Uber or trying to arrange for their sister-in-law to come to a certain pier in Miami or wherever it is. It certainly makes sense. But on a more practical note, certainly if there is some things happening on the ship and they have to prioritize those communications, like the communications of the captain sending potentially, let's say, or chief engineer sending in pictures or video about an engine that they need to replace a part for, versus downloading your favorite Netflix movie, which is fine. I'm not saying is it, but if you have to prioritize that, I think if I'm the operator, I think I know which one I want to see.
Exactly. I mean, we talk to our customers and they'll say things like, we want to be able to provide crew internet, but we don't want the crew to be able to get on the internet for the 2 hours heading into harbor and the 2 hours heading out, for example, because they've got other things that we want them focusing on. Or there is a higher priority in terms of that operational data that has to go. So the ability to control that usage, not just at a shipboard level, but the individual networks like the operations or the crew or the officers, sometimes even all the way down to individual devices, where you can say, yes, we have a PC on the bridge, but the PC on the bridge can only go to these 5 sites. We don't want someone using the PC on the bridge to go onto an e-commerce site because they want to buy something and have it delivered, when they arrive at their next port. That's not the purpose of that device. It should only be focused on its particular need. And this type of intelligent hybrid design and the middleware that can be used can drill down to that individual level. But at the same time, it could also be used if there's a problem with something on board ship, where you can create a secure link that allows an engineer on shore to be able to essentially dial into, using old terminology, but dial into an onboard system like a pump or like an HVAC or like an engine, and actually be able to have live interaction just with that system, nothing else on board. So it's very secure, but it allows them to do remote service and support, and then being able to do things like video conferencing, where you've got an engineer or a tech support person on shore and you're able to use your phone and be able to show them what you're looking at. And they can say, no, grab the red wire. No, the other red wire, because they see where you're reaching. Those are all of the capabilities that the new approaches to communications are making available to ships. And it's going to help save money, but it's also going to help save lives, and it's going to help crew stay healthier as a result.
Yeah, and we've had other people on, a couple of other companies come on who are doing this sort of preventive maintenance. I wouldn't call it preventive maintenance. It was all like advanced preventive maintenance, and that's where. But all of it relies on that connectivity with the ships, and it's important part. It's an important part of what they're doing, and that kind of leads us to the next kind of question or category we teased it a little bit earlier, and that's the crew and connectivity, and that's really, there's a lot of different schools of thought. How do you control it? Do you control it? How is this kind of playing out in your view, as crews have more access to the internet? Like you said, one of the interesting things, which I didn't realize, is that they could segment the network, so to speak. So if the crew does something inadvertently, it doesn't have impact, let's say, on the bridge or the engine room or other operating equipment. How are you seeing this played out and over time, and how has it maybe changed or kind of been different than what you thought, so to speak?
I think there's a couple of things that have happened. I think industry wide, there's a recognition that crew connectivity is vital. We've seen Maritime Labor Convention rules pressing for connectivity as a key right for seafarers. And while it was pretty horrible period of time, the pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes to the need for crew connectivity. When you had crew that would usually be rotating off the ship, every 3 months or every 6 months, all of a sudden they're on that ship for a year, 18 months. They can't get home, and they need to be able to be in touch with family. They need to be able to have lives. And there was a real recognition that connectivity was critical. We're seeing a number of different things. One, we see fleet operators who want to be able to provide that connectivity for crew. And because of, for example, the things that we do at KVH, where we have what we would call a multi-orbit, multi-channel solution that would include Starlink, Wi-Fi, 5G, VSAT, et cetera, a ship can have that connectivity for a crew, and then they can choose which channel they want them to use, how much data, perhaps on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, or once they use up that data, do they get an opportunity? Can the crew buy themselves more data through like vouchers or something like that? So there's a lot of interest and a lot of curiosity about ways to provide that connectivity. But then the other aspect of it is not just being able to be on social media or be able to make a phone call home. I mean, I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and when I'm traveling on business, I like to be able to get on FaceTime and talk to her and actually see her and talk about her schoolwork and things that would just have boggled my mind when I was 12 and we had, rotary phones. But
I know a lot more about my kids now than my parents ever knew about me. I have to tell you that right now. Sometimes I'm like, maybe we know a little bit too much. Like, you could be out there in the ether, but I don't know. That's a whole other discussion for parenting.
But we've got people who want to, these crews, they want to be entertained. And one of the things that people are now figuring out is that something like Starlink, or when OneWeb is available, or Kuiper, it's fast and it's affordable, but it still does cost money, and it costs more than just your connections at home. If you think about your home connection, maybe you've got a terabyte of data that you can use for your family at home, and it's, over fiber, and, maybe it costs you $100. But when you're talking about 50 gigabytes of data that's costing $250, and a high def movie using 4 or 5 gigabytes per movie, all of a sudden you watch 10 movies and you've got no data left. So we also want to make sure that entertainment can get on board. So we offer things like what we call KVH Link, where we actually use unused capacity on our network to deliver movies and TV and sporting events, daily news, both in print and, television news, karaoke. I mean, social interaction on board ship is critical. So there are just so many different ways to get that type of content, that type of connectivity to these vessels and to the crew. And this is where we're seeing fleets of 80, 100 vessels more coming to us and saying, how do we get this content on board our ship, because we need it for our crew? They recognize it. It's a competitive advantage if your crew has good morale and they know they're going to be treated well, and they know that they're going to be able to have some entertainment when they're off watch. They're not going to want to leave. So you can spend all that time and energy getting them trained, making your ship as efficient as possible, and then be able to retain that crew.
I guess it's a little bit of a downside is all this technology. You talk about training, people have to be trained on it and everything else. Do you see, folks, as things become more sophisticated, using connectivity to train and do other things? Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Are we kind of overwhelming seafarers now, or maybe getting some of the training and stuff on board allows seafarers to have more free time when they go ashore? Is that like a kind of a double-edged sword? I think. What do you kind of see? Because I've heard a little bit. Oh, we could do training at ashore. We could do training at sea, but then you're taking away from their downtime. How you see that playing out? Because I think it all gets into the crew morale and well-being.
I agree. I mean, I think that most members of a crew, just like people in an office, they want to learn. Most people want to build their skills, and having this connectivity, and whether or not it is delivering the training via streaming or being able to deliver it so that it's then a recording that they can watch and then they can take a test on it. Anything like that is going to help. I don't think that there's any one right way of doing it. I really think that the capabilities that are out there right now will allow fleet managers, crewing managers to develop in cooperation with a partner like KVH or one of the other companies that's out there, to develop a solution that's going to work best for them. We really have that opportunity to offer custom approaches because it's not a one size fits all type of arrangement.
No, I agree. And going back, I was thinking about this when you were just mentioning this here about training, going back to my very brief 4-year sailing, in the U.S. flag. I remember we had some issues. And the funny thing is about connectivity, what makes this interesting is that all the times that the fleet superintendent had to come out or a tech had to come out to the ship and look at it and sometimes troubleshoot it quickly, sometimes maybe not so quickly. But I think about all the savings of having a technical superintendent sitting alongside the rep for the manufacturer for the OEM part, whatever you're looking at, and maybe still having to come out to the ship, but then having the game plan just a lot more than, yeah, we think it's a sensor, but we're gonna have to come out and look at it because it may not be. I think it creates this whole new paradigm of, and I'm sure it's been going on, of having a lot less downtime, which is just beneficial for everybody.
Yep, I think that's true. And then also, it used to be that you get a technician who might, and we actually had this happen, years ago, where a technician got on board ship to fix, to work on an antenna, and they weren't quite done yet, but the ship had to sail. So the technician left with the boat,
Yeah.
and in order to make sure that it was running. But now with the ability to dial in, to be able to see what's going on, to do sort of that advanced proactive type of thing, the predictive maintenance, where it's like, okay, this is probably coming up on a need for a replacement for a belt, right, or something like that. We aim with our tech support, which is worldwide, for as high a percentage of first time fixes as possible. Where we go on, we fix it and we're done. We don't have to say, oh, wait, it's something else. We need to go and get a different part. We want to be able to go on board. And with the ability for all of these systems to be networked, we really can see what exactly is going on. So we know what the problem is before we ever get there, so that the technician can be prepared and it doesn't hold up or cause a problem for the vessel.
Right.
And they can get on with their jobs.
Right. Or the technician then, has to get on in Miami and the ship's, going to be next stop is someplace in South America. Not that there's anything wrong, but then he or she, had to do 8 hours worth of work and then lost a week's worth of productivity because they were sailing someplace.
Right.
Which kind of pivots into the next thing is if you wind back, you said you've been with KVH for 25 years. So in the maritime space, or at least adjacent to it, if not right off the bat, but certainly in the satellite communication, and I consider it clearly in the maritime space. What would you tell somebody, maybe you have an intern and they're looking at you and working for Starlink or Tesla or something? What makes this kind of such an interesting industry that you'd want to encourage people, whether it's a shipping career, maybe someone, one of your daughter's classmates in a few years says, hey, you're in maritime, I want to go work on ships, or somebody a little more advanced saying, I'm looking at this opportunity and I'd like to, I'm thinking about pivoting into maritime. What would you tell them?
I think that if someone wants to be in a career that really does make a difference in people's lives, commercial shipping, the commercial maritime industry is a way of doing it. People don't often think about it. It's kind of an unsung type of thing. Yeah. But there was a stat that I saw that like 90% of the goods that we, that are bought, travel by ship. So the clothes that you buy, the hardware that you purchase to be able to build your kid a treehouse, something like that, in many cases that came via ship. So, and it's not just that. We've got a good friend of mine who I work with. Her son is now, crewed on cruise vessels, and he's focused on environmental issues. So he's looking at how do these vessels operate and keep the environment, safe, minimizing carbon, minimizing spills, minimizing, risk to the environment. So there are just so many different ways for people to get involved. And then from the technology side of things, it's always changing and it's really exciting. The stuff that's going on right now is just fantastic. I love it. I wouldn't be in this industry for this long if I didn't enjoy the technology and the knowledge that, again, we're making a difference in the lives of seafarers.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I really just enjoy, I mean, obviously I kind of got attracted to the international side of everything and kind of that. but certainly I think the opportunity is for companies as well as individuals to really kind of to be part of the maritime space. And they don't necessarily have to be part of a maritime hub. We see that thing, top maritime hubs, Singapore, Denmark, blah, blah. You can sit in the middle of a country, middle of the US, middle of someplace in Africa, and be part of it, because you could dial in, you could be remote, you could say, I want to have this positive impact. And I to your point, I had a guest on from Vision, which is a software company that does container tracking, and he made this really wonderful point, and that was, if you make a 1% change in efficiency in the shipping industry, because it's $1 trillion industry, you're saving billions of, you just do the math, yes. Right? And so if you have, I had another guest on who said, for every ton of fuel oil that you've saved 3 tons of CO2 gas. So if you could have ways to make your ships run more efficient and everything else, despite the fact that it is the most efficient way of doing things, you are saving so much more, in terms of just thinking about it on a daily basis on how long that would take you to drive. I think it's like,
right.
I forgot what the example was, but the point is you could, for an individual or a group of individuals, you can come together and make some serious changes, and to have this really large impact. And I think that's exciting. As we wrap up, I love asking this question, and I love kind of setting it up by saying any answer you give is okay. It can be an audio book. It can be, I'm writing something. We talked before that you had a podcast about writing, so maybe you are writing something. So what are you reading these days? And I love to hear that, and it doesn't have to be, well, I'm reading something about building my professional career. It could be, my little dirty secret is I'm passionate about 2 things, ships and Star Wars. And I read all of the extended universe Star Wars books. Like, I just go through them, and that's like where I nerd out a little bit, and that's okay.
Oh, I love those too. Right now I'm reading and working on a couple of things. I actually, I've written my first mystery novel, and it's out with 6 agents right now who are looking at it. So fingers crossed that actually ends up getting published at some point. But I'm always going back to that and saying, okay, where can I fix it? Where can I make it a little bit better? I'm currently binging a mystery series by an author named James R. Ben, and it's about an investigator during World War II. Who's kind of a special investigator for Eisenhower, and he travels all over Europe, meets all sorts of actual people, historically, who were there. After I finish that, the next one that I'm going to be reading is just for fun. It's a book about the making of the Blues Brothers movie. And the rise of American improv. It's by a guy named Daniel DeVise, I think is his name.
Oh.
And really looking forward to that, because it's such a fun, stupid movie that they were just trying to trash as many cars as they could, but reading about how that all came about as a result of improv with Saturday Night Live and things like that. I'm really looking forward to that one. That one's sitting on my nightstand right now.
Four whole chickens and a cook. Yeah. What are the, if you know, I think that's
exactly.
It.
Yeah.
Speaking of books about the genre that you're reading now about kind of historical fiction, have you read, and it's one of my favorite, I got into it years ago, and I didn't really read it in order, books by an author called Alan Furst, F-U-R-S-T.
I'm familiar with the name. What were the books about?
So it's a similar thing. It's historical fiction set in World War II. And they talk about, like, in the first book, and I read them a little bit out of order, but they'll have, like, let's say a group of characters A, and then a subset of characters B, C, and D.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first book, it's mostly about that, but they talk to B, they talk to C, they talk to D, and then the next book is about C, and B, D, and A are in the background, right? So then a guy that you met for like 3 pages, all of a sudden he's the main character, and it's
right. Oh yes, I've read. Which one did I read? I gotta think about it. The Polish officer might have been.
Polish officer, I think, was the most famous one. Yeah.
Yes.
And what's cool about it, at least from a very American point of view, and if you're still listening at this point, I thank you. And I'm going to admit, as an American, we have a certain view of World War II, and I'm not saying like who, what, like, not none of that, but there is a view that we talk about, and this gets into the view of of like all the things that happened with the Russia and the pogroms, the wars that were fought in Hungary, or and then southeast of there, where that really wasn't, because I don't think the Americans were heavily involved in there. It was other aspects. So talking about like, all of those sorts of things. And I think in one of the books, the spies are traveling by tugboat down one of the rivers. So it's like, gets really nautical. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. Like tugboats, who knew? But it's kind of cool. And I think if you're into that sort of stuff, and again, they talk about that, and some of it's, focused on, the French resistance and other things that maybe got a little bit more coverage of growing up. But certainly there's a lot of it that you just didn't know about. Like I just didn't know about it. Again, not challenging if it's factual, but just that like it really wasn't highlighted. And it's kind of interesting. So if you like that sort of stuff, it's certainly worth doing that.
Cool. I will check him out because, like I said, I read one, but I think he's got a lot more. So
I think I want to say about 12 to 15 easily.
I will check him out because I love that stuff. That's great.
Yeah, it's very good. I went into a bookstore maybe about 6 or 8 years ago. I'm like, I want to read something. The woman couldn't run over there fast enough. It goes, you have to read these. And I think the Polish officer was the first one. She goes, start with this. I don't think it's the first one, but maybe it was most famous. Well, Chris, this was a great chat. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I think what we talked about, talking about something I didn't know about, certainly some of the nuances of satellites and connectivity and things like that were new to me, and I appreciate you sharing them with everybody.
That was my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.